Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of Ambush on Air. I'm your host, Sam Bush, and as always, I have brought a very special guest, one you may recognize from a couple of other episodes. I am here with my friend May. So, May, why don't you do a quick intro on you?
Hi, good to be here. Happy New Year, everybody. I am in the branding world as well, from a marketing background that has been transformed from architecture to from journalism, all kinds of fun stuff to come to bear on where I'm at now, which is B2B SaaS marketing. So happy to be here with my girl Sam, just to unpack some stuff that I think we are all hearing
Yeah.
about going from freelance to consultancy. But you know what, Sam, let's take it out.
Yeah. So, for a lot of you guys who've been following the podcast, you remember my stint in the summer and fall where I took the leap and quit my full-time role that just wasn't serving me anymore. I wanted a little bit more out of what I was doing and decided to pursue consulting full-time and really build my own consultancy around partnerships, positioning, and messaging, essentially. So, demand generation through partner channels. As you guys know, I'm a big partner girly. So, obviously, that is always in the thread for me. And then May, around the same time, and even sooner than me, was doing her own consultancy and starting that off. So, talk to us a little bit about what you spun up through Creator Spark.
Yeah, it's funny. I think 2024 might have been sort of a surge in people really experimenting with going out on their own yeah, the consultancy experimentation really kind of think took off. It could have also been impacted by the job market, obviously. There was tons of tech layoffs. We're both in tech. And it did impact a bunch of colleagues of ours. That said,
Mhm.
though, what it did was really give us an opportunity to expand on what we understood as value that we bring to an organization and
Yeah.
really provide that from a consultancy standpoint from, as sort of freelancers, right? So for
Yeah.
me, Creator Spark was is my business. I should say it's still live and kicking.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was really kind of hearing was, and we are still hearing this, and this is why this subject is super important to talk through and unpack, because I think it's starting to be back into the conversation for 2025, is what makes you want to go into consultancy, what's the what are the leaps you have to make. For me, it really was a culmination of understanding that I brought a certain set of value and skills to bear on an organization, and I wanted to really see that impact immediately, and in on my own terms. And so it was really driven by coming out of organizations that, while we did really great work, I found that there was opportunity to do things in a different way, right? Just to
Yeah.
experiment in a different way. You don't necessarily always have that freedom when you
Yeah.
find in a full-time role. That's not to say it's not there, but consultancy opens
Totally.
it up. And that's
Yeah.
really what I found with Creator Spark. Going out on my own
Yeah.
really allowed that freedom and expansion to really move the needle in ways that were a little bit more experiential, and I don't know, it was really fulfilling to me, but not without some scary times. So I don't know
Oh,
about that with you, Sam, if you feel the same
yeah.
way.
So I think we met, what was it, like 4 years ago now?
Just
And
about,
the
yeah.
minute I met you, I knew you had this entrepreneurial spirit. And I found kindred in that with you because it was like, I know I could be the CMO of a small organization today, but I'm not ready for it, right? But I have all of those skills that I want to give to an organization, but I'm kind of pigeonholed in a full-time role in a niche, right? Because that's what a larger growing SaaS company is looking for. They're looking for a niche target that you do your target job and you do that, and it's fun and it's great and you can grow in that and what have you. But what I was looking for was I want to do more than one hat. I know you had a really focused niche. I was like, I want to do crazy campaigns with people. I want to build partner programs with people and I want to do messaging matrix like I'm in product marketing because I strongly think I still am, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And I
for me,
think
it
it
was
does let
hard
you,
to
yeah.
sit in a seat and have one job.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. So actually it was a lot of hats, right? And I've always been wearing a lot of hats, but I
Yeah.
think this allowed us to, so from a creative content branding
Mhm.
perspective, and really dipping your toes into demand gen. I got really into data analysis,
Yep.
starting to build really concerted dashboards that I wasn't really while I was able to do some of that in previous roles, I really was able to expand on my skill set. So one thing I'll say about consultancy and going off on your own is you are truly able to identify what you like, what you don't, and
Yeah.
really focus your attention and efforts on that. That said, one of the things that we talk about, and I've been talking about with colleagues that are asking about what does it take, like what to consider if you're thinking about going to consultancy, because we're talking about it in this really kind of ethereal way, and it was super successful for a good chunk of our
Yeah.
experience with consultancy was pretty successful. I was happy to
Yeah.
get in the first 2 months of consultancy for reoccurring
Yeah,
retained
you were rocking and
clients.
rolling.
It was great, but I know that most people are really a little bit, they're trepidatious about it, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of things to consider. But one thing I will say is that what I have heard is a big blocker is that people kind of question their value in the sense, okay, well, I'd love to go into consultancy and do something freelance, but who will pay for what I
Well,
know?
in the back of your head, you have that weird colleague who said something one time in a meeting about something you did that they didn't like. So that now in the is in the back of your head forever when you think about
Seed,
going out
yeah,
on your own.
yeah.
You're like, that was 12 years ago, you know?
And I think people are also inherently, I think it's the imposter syndrome really, and there is an inherent, to a certain extent, as even the most confident of us have a little bit of there's also this little bit of anxiety and yeah, exactly. I think that's pretty natural. But let me tell you what, after talking to some people about it before I actually entered into consultancy and decided to jump in, one thing I will say is that to keep this in mind, people will pay for your knowledge and your skills. Make no mistake. One of the things that is the biggest, I think, self-imposed blocker on people
Yes.
trying to enter consultancy and freelance is their questioning of their value from
Mm.
a skills perspective, from a rate perspective. Will
Oh,
people
from a
really
rate
pay this
perspective,
rate?
that's me. I started off being like, you can pay me $10 and I'll rewrite your whole website, you know?
And
And one of
it's
my
so funny you
mentors
say
was
that.
like, you are crazy. She's like, people literally in the Microsoft channel will be like, oh my God, Sam Bush is working on this thing for us. Like, you should be charging millions of dollars, not a dollar.
And I think one of the things that is something to consider for those of you who are hopping around on LinkedIn, because I know that that is sometimes and like all social media, let's just call it what it is. It can be sometimes a little self-reflective and depressing. You see all these people posting on how successful they are, and first of all, take everything with a grain of salt. But second of all, realize that, and this is what I really did that really just helped me kind of reconcile any of this insecurity, was the idea that people will pay for a whole lot less than what you can bring. Like when you really start to yeah, when you start to think about what people would be willing to pay for, and you're like, well, I
Yeah.
could do that, or I
Yeah.
my skill set and knowledge is a whole lot more than that. You start to realize, wait a minute, I am a commodity. My skill set, my knowledge, my value is here. And I think that is the biggest hurdle for people to overcome, and it is not easy. I am not saying that that's easy,
Yeah.
but it is the biggest one that I think I could share with any colleagues or anybody
Yeah.
who's considering moving into freelance or consultancy, or starting their own business. It would be,
Hmm.
take a second to realize and put down on paper all of the things, and it's a lot more than you think
Yeah.
that
Oh
you
my
could
God.
offer an organization. Truly, there is more there than you would ever you realize, and people will
Yeah.
pay.
Exactly. And I think that's what was a roadblock for me, candidly, which you guys don't ever think of me talking like this, but in my first 2 months of it, I was like crying daily because I was like, I feel like I don't know what to even offer these people. Like, I know what I'm good at, I know what I want to do. But like, how do I package it? Do I package it? Um, I had so many mentors and friends say, this is how I do it, but you don't have to do it this way, and everybody does it different, and blah, blah, blah. So I got really in my head about how to present my offerings. And
Mhm.
that was a roadblock for me. I started slow
Oh, and
because
it's a good one to bring up.
I'm like, I wasn't ready to ramp up when I took the leap.
And I
Instead, I
think
was
that's
like,
a
I'm a single 36-year-old woman with like the only bills I have are normal people bills, like I don't have this giant like financial weight over me, so I can take this leap now. But I wasn't really thinking of like I should have started making these moves while I was still in a full-time position to get myself prepared.
I think that's a big lesson learned. So one of the things to think about in terms of like lessons from the trenches, as you kind of you and I chatted about
100%.
before our call here, is that one thing to offer. First of all, there's tons and tons of programs and tons of people and resources that will help you think through how to message and package. That could
Yeah,
be a whole nother 2 to 3 or 4 episodes of this podcast on just really refining the lessons learned from how to actually get your LLC up and running, whether to file for S corp. There's all kinds of other things to think about from a business standpoint, but there are tons of resources out there, right? So one of the
exactly.
things that we are living in is an age of an abundance of resources to actually help you really kickstart a business. But it is something to consider. And to your point, oftentimes it is more, I think, logistically set up for success if you start thinking about this while you're still in a full-time role, if
Oh,
that
yeah.
is your scenario. Because I
Oh, yeah.
do think there is something to be said about tiptoeing into consultancy versus just, jumping off the
I
cliff.
was like, and then
And
I
it's me
realized
too.
I had quickly and
And I'm with you. It's like it depends on your lifestyle. And it's something to
yeah,
think about from a financial, from a logistic, and from a lifestyle
yeah,
perspective. Does this fit within your lifestyle? Some people are not comfortable without benefits. There's a lot of things to be
yeah.
said. Right. You're gonna have to sell, you have,
The
self.
first like Cobra payment popped up and I was like, "Do I
Exactly.
need insurance?" I guess.
And it's there is no denying it is scary. I have to acknowledge this because I do think that it's something worthwhile. While
I
we
think
have
it's so
found
sexy
success.
and so interesting and so cool. Like when you tell somebody you're like, I'm a freelancer, people are like, "Oh, you live this really cool life." And for some people they absolutely do. For me, I was like, "This is the scariest thing I've ever done." You
It's
know?
out of your comfort zone for sure. And
Yeah.
especially if all you've known is full time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It is you were your own boss, all of those things.
Yeah.
I think this audience is definitely, up I don't want to patronize because I know you all
Totally.
very very aware and learned of like what you're hearing as to what it takes to be your own boss. Listen,
Totally.
it's not this fabulous thing left and right. It's like
But some
there's a
people have
lot of
it
work,
great.
a lot of
Like
anxiety.
I
But
had an amazing mentor and friend. Well, I still have her. She's still my friend. But her name's Kristen Hoseman. Shout out Kristen, how much I appreciate it. But she was ready to boot camp me into doing it. And I was so nervous that I was like, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And I was so wish-washy about it because I couldn't decide if that's the future I actually wanted or one I assumed I wanted because I have this like executive mindset, boss mindset, I'm like,
yeah.
is it just that I want to be my own boss or do I just want to be the boss? Those are
That's a
two
really
very
good question to
different
pose
things.
for yourself. Right.
Exactly.
One thing I will say when it comes to experimentation with consultancy and freelance work is it doesn't have to be forever, just like full time doesn't have to be forever. I think one of the things that we want to think through as an overall society, really, when it comes to how we approach work, is that it can shift and it depends on where you are in your life and it depends on where you are in your career, but having this sense of, well, if I pull, I don't want to say pull the trigger these days, but if I go down this lane,
There you go.
it's
Drive
gonna
your
be
car.
forever. Yeah, it's gonna be forever. It's not. I think leaving the room for flexibility and for being really nimble and agile and changing your mind, which I think this is
Yeah.
a big, big concern for most people. It's like, well, if I go into full time, then it's forever. If I go into consultancy, it's forever. Remove
Yeah.
that mindset and you will
Yeah.
free yourself to truly explore fully
Oh,
what
yeah.
each of those options offer. Right. So
Yeah.
I would say that one of the big things in terms of transition, because I do want to
Mhm.
say that at the end of the day, right now, both of us have found real success in both worlds, right?
Yep.
We've decided that consultancy is something that really works for us, but we have now since transitioned to full time, and we should unpack why we did for the audience
Yeah.
so that they understand
Yep.
what were the genesis of why we did it and the non-negotiables of what pushed us and
Yes.
to
Yes.
to actually make that transition. But before we do, I do want to just say at the end of the day, the reason why this topic is so timely is that even just over the course of the last several weeks, I've had so many colleagues ask about this transition and
Yep.
from both sides, going from consultancy
Yep.
into full time again and vice versa. People that
Yeah.
are now in full time, they're like, you know what? I think 2025 is the year I want to experiment with this. So just thinking about and embracing that this is temporal. This is not about a forever decision. But
Yeah.
I certainly suggest, if possible, to explore them both so you can make a concerted and educated,
Like,
uh, you know, um, uh, decision on what best fits you for now.
yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I think for me, kind of the process of figuring all of that out was super rocky. I know I have mentioned a couple times 2024 was one of the worst years of my life in a lot of ways, not just in work, but it was because I was uncomfortable. And it wasn't that it was bad that I was uncomfortable, it was just stressful.
Yeah.
But I think I learned more about myself last year than I have ever. Like I know now what, especially in work, but more so in life, but
Yeah.
in work, what I look for in my day-to-day, like, activity in a job or in a daily career passion fulfillment, right? Because
Agreed.
I went from, a daily stable job of, like, I kinda do the same thing every day to free falling into freelance and having a whole bunch of family things go on in the summer and all of the chaos of the fall here in the United States. And
Mhm.
then now I'm in you guys have seen I made two pivots into full time. One that I was there for about a month and quickly jumped to where I'm at now, and we can talk all about that. But I think it's been an interesting trajectory from the learning perspective of it, and I don't regret it at all. And I
I agree.
still have consulting clients that I keep. And I think that's kind of transitioning the convo into kind of why we pick the full-time roles that we're in. For me, one of them is my non-negotiables were I'm keeping the podcast, I'm traveling for the podcast, I'm doing speaking sessions for the podcast, or for myself and your business, and I'm going to keep consulting clients. And if I can't do that, I'm not going to work a full-time role somewhere because I still need to be
Exactly.
fulfilled in my passion projects,
Mhm.
well, just as much as I need that fulfillment in my daily FTE role.
I would completely agree from all the way to when you said that 2024 was transitional. It was absolutely transitional for me on all of the levels that you spoke about, from a personal growth and development perspective, all the way
Personal.
to how that actually fueled my move into consultancy, which, by the way, was absolutely informed by an entire sort of self-discovery that happened towards the beginning of the year. And
Okay.
just for the audience, the previous year, my husband and I actually quit our jobs and traveled the world for 6 months. And that was incredibly pivotal for a growth, from a growth perspective. I know that's not for everybody. I know that not everybody is able to do that. We were very fortunate that we could, but it absolutely fueled going into 2024 with a very different mindset. And it was a
Yeah.
discovery year. And to your point, it was a tough one because we
Yeah.
came back to a very volatile marketing, job market. But
Yeah.
moreover, it really became it was reflective, and it was definitely informed from that previous sort of chapter. But to your
Yeah.
point, I started to really put on paper, so to speak, what I need out of not just a job life. Like,
Life.
what is going to actually make you a happy human? Let's not forget that your job is like 70% of your day, if not more. Like, I mean, it's
Exactly.
just a huge part of your
Depends on
life.
when you
So
go to bed, but yes.
yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, that's probably not the right ratio, May. And I said something about being in data. Guys, don't hold that against me.
And I'm like, she was
I
born
need a whole lot more coffee for that. No, that's math. But the
Oh,
idea is that, to your point about it being really important to identify the criteria that are non-negotiable for you to be a happy human. Because when you are a happy human, you are a happy worker, you're a happy colleague, you're a happy, just a general, an essence and a value to any organization, be it from a personal one or a professional one. So knowing what that criteria is and being really holding true to it. And I know this sounds a little crunchy granola, but it is incredibly important for you to then identify what your next steps are. So for me, it was consultancy. I know it was for you as well, because it turned into, you know what, I'm going to create the job I want. Because it did feel stifling being in a full-time situation where you weren't able to do everything you wanted, or you felt confined in some certain ways. And so for at least me, and I'm sure it was the same for you, we decided to expand into consultancy because it made sense after this phase of self-discovery. But that said, now that we transition back to full time, I think the audience is like, okay, well, what made you? You guys all have strong ideas and feelings and opinions about why you need to be on your own. Well, let me tell you what, part of it was the same thing that you said, is that putting together the list of the non-negotiables really helps drive whether or not you need to make that transition. For me, just like you, one of the big non-negotiables is that I still keep my consultancy. I still have two of those clients. They are reoccurring. They're a lovely addition to my overall, portfolio. But the idea is that there has been no hindrance of my consultancy, of my personal brand, of my personal growth. And just like you on the podcast, you have to be able to have that fit in your life because you've made the decision that it's important and it's an essential thing to be.
Exactly. And I remember starting to look for a full-time role at the end of the summer, early fall, and I had so many conversations with people I knew in the space that were like, "We can't wait to hire you, but how many speaking sessions do you actually do? Like, how is that
Mhm.
going to affect your daily job? How many hours a week do you spend on that?" And I'm like, red flag. Like, if you don't trust me to do my job after knowing me, first off, because you already know my work. Like, I only interviewed with people who knew me,
Mhm.
even
Mhm.
still, like, except for one company, but that's a whole other conversation. And then number two, in those conversations, watching their facial reactions and their body language and behavior. When I would say, I speak at Microsoft shows mainly, but I'm looking to get into some other ones on my own time. And they
Yeah.
would be like, "Well, how many of those are you looking for?" And I'm like, "What are you getting at? You want me to be a workaholic chained to my desk?" Because that's how it comes across to me. Is like, you're scared that I'm going to get out in the world and talk about marketing, and it's either going to make it look like I'm trying to leave or like I'm prioritizing my own personal brand over your business brand. And I'm like, newsflash, I work at a company now that's black, white, red, and maroon. Look at the color change. Okay. We already flipped the script. We already got the new sandwich hat. Like, I'm here to rep the new brand. But I still have my podcast and my brand persona that is me, right?
And I think that's the thing, is that that's what organizations are hiring, right? And the good ones, and that's again why it's the list of non-negotiables for those of us who have transitioned. Mine was the same way, making sure that they are very aware and celebrate and support
Yes.
who you are as a human being, as a contributor, as your own brand. It's an amplification, if not an actual, you know, promotion of their own, an extension of their own marketing. This is somebody that actually is representative of the kind of people that we work with. This
I
is
mean,
part of our organization. It's absolutely, I think, an expansion
I
of their
agree.
own marketing reach, quite
I
frankly.
agree. And I'm like, just because I'm not talking about supply chain during these sessions doesn't mean I'm not socially selling and reminding people who Netstock is. And that's the beauty of the organization I'm at and the team that I'm a part of. I mean, I literally bought a red leather suit to wear to the conference
There you go.
because
Keeping the
I was like, yeah,
brand standards,
I
right?
go all in. When
You
I
go
go
all
in, I
in. I
go
know you
hard,
do.
you
I
know?
know you do. And speaking from a brand perspective as well, since I run brand for Aravo, it's the same
Mhm.
thing. It's like it's the sense that there is some of my non-negotiables, to be clear, was to believe in an organization and their mission, to believe in something. And I know that that is something that sounds a little lofty. And I'm not talking about because, we're curing cancer, but what we are doing is contributing to society and contributing to business to elevate integrity within business and doing business. That is what Aravo does. But that was the inspiration by that I, and by the way, full transparency, Aravo was one of my clients, and that's the best, is when it turns into, from a client, from a consultancy perspective, I was brought on, but that transitioned into full time because as I was a consultant for this organization, I got to have that peak, which consultancy is really great for that. Those of you who are experimenting with consultancy and thinking about where it could potentially lead and why it should be considered potential, not necessarily forever, you do not realize how valuable consultancy can be for finding your next role. It
Oh,
really does allow you, yeah, it allows you to like kind of have that peek under the curtain. And it's in
and then
a
you
very
have the
different way.
you have the details so you know what
Yeah.
you're getting into when you sign full time. It's like a test drive,
The
essentially.
test drive,
Like,
it's absolutely a
better way.
test drive. It's a test drive. And that, by the way, goes from a fractional standpoint. A lot of people are using fractional. That's still, sort of in the same vein of freelance and
Right.
consultancy. But like, understanding what the non-negotiables are for you. For me, it was having an autonomy, for, being proud of the work that I do, and the
Mhm.
company culture being a really strong an
Then
element.
culture is
Um,
everything. And
Absolutely. Culture is
just
everything. And in
because
the remote world, you
SaaS
don't have the
companies
water cooler sort of experience anymore. Culture, it matters more than it has ever mattered before.
yes.
But like I said, I think one of the things that you want to think through is all of the non-negotiables, the check boxes that need to be, to be ticked off before you make that transition. And that goes both ways, right? We're talking
Yep.
about, for us, having gone from full-time to consultancy, and then consultancy back to full-time, but with a sort of hybrid scenario. That will be different with everybody. But one of the biggest things that
Mhm.
I would really push is that for people to remove any preconceived mindsets that any of this is permanent. I think leaving yourself to be flexible and experiment
Mhm.
with that mindset will give you the most you'll get the most out of either experience, either one that you're sort of considering. So
Yeah.
it's just interesting because I think right now people are really exploring their options because they
I know,
can't,
and I love
right?
it.
This is, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
transitional time in our workforce, I think.
Oh, 100%. With all the advances, changes in the economy and all of that, like, it's going to be a wild year in the workforce for
I think
sure.
you're right.
Okay, I'm gonna say a couple more things about my non-negotiables, then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, so
But okay, so you mentioned ability to expand your brand, being inspired by the purpose of the org, having autonomy, all of that stuff. I think two other things sit for me that we talked about, and that is having a concerted seat at the table in an organization is a
absolutely.
non-negotiable for me. I cannot be buried 3 levels below a mid-level manager anymore. Um, that's not who I am. That's not what I'm good at, and that's not where I see my future and my existing, right? So for me, when I was looking for a full-time role, I was like, I'll either be in a director level or above, period, right? Right now
Mhm.
I'm not, but I still have that seat at a table. And I basically, the thing with NetStock, and I'll just brag 1 second about them is um this is a created position that they were kind of starting to think about. And I was at a golf course having the time of my life riding around goofing off in September or October, and one of the channel reps was like, man, we'd love to hire you. And I was like, man, I'd love to work there, so give me a call. And started literally a month and a half later, after a series of conversation. But basically, I get to do what I wanted to build all along, which is this hybrid role of partnerships and sales and marketing all in one. So I'm a partner marketing manager, but the way that I view partner marketing is a little bit different than other organizations that I've
Mhm.
talked to. And I think the way that I'm approaching it now is the way of the future of partner marketing, for these high growth SaaS companies. So I
Right.
report into partnerships. I'm on the sales team, and
Mhm.
I basically come up with marketing campaigns aligned to the sales and revenue. And then
Mhm.
our marketing team is a digital inbound, outbound function that jams out. But they're
Yeah.
also an agency to me.
Yes, absolutely. And I
That's
think that
actually
mindset is
a different
really
business
important in
model.
B2B.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, and I
it's like
think this
demand
is
gen, but for partnerships, for
exactly.
relationships. And I'm like, you guys, this is the future. So my
Absolutely.
non-negotiable was like, let's do something new. Let's try something out. Let's think about this outside of the traditional box. And
Mhm.
I mean, that's what the whole podcast is about. That's what my whole brand is about, right? That's what I am about, is like, let's do something different. Let's shake this up because it's not
Absolutely.
always going to work the same.
And I think
Yeah.
that's the
But
genesis of why we are, you and I and so many of our colleagues are experimenting with consultancy, because
yeah,
it's the sense of, if we can't get an organization to try to experiment and to try new things, we're going to do it ourselves.
we're
And
gonna
what
do it ourselves.
happens, absolutely. And to your point though, and this is a big consideration that, I do want to leave the group with, is that your network is insanely powerful. You talked about being on the golf course with a colleague. Listen, not only did I get my clients from my network, but I got my full-time role from my network, right? So like your network is insanely valuable, and you don't realize its value until you really tap into it to experiment with where you go next. And you're exactly right. You start making, my role didn't exist either at Arabo. So there's this whole sense of like you start to really create your own role, your own future, your own, and you really start to put those, those experiments to play, because you've now cultivated your value within an organization through your network and through experimenting on your own by going out to consultancy. So it's an interesting experience. It's not necessarily for everybody, and where they are right now in their career, you have to do a case by case sort of analysis. But I strongly suggest that people really look to their network when they think about what they could do on their own. And it could be a little bit dipping your toe. It doesn't have to be, I'm quitting my job and going crazy here, or, doing something incredibly bold. Those of us who can and want to live that way, cool, but it's not necessarily for everyone. But it is an interesting thing to think through with this next year coming up with a lot of uncertainty, and not necessarily in a bad way, but it's been on a roll of uncertainty for the last couple years here, guys. So just being very real. So
Yep.
like embrace it in the sense that let's start experimenting. So
Yes. I think that's the catalyst for the year for me in general. Like even when I'm writing out my like goals and what's in and out for Sam this year, it's
yeah,
like, let's just try new shit.
just try new shit.
Period.
That's
Try new
it.
shit.
And
Be
that, you know what, does not
yourself
stop with
and
your
try new
job.
shit.
Yeah, that does not stop with your job, everybody. Like I do have to say, you will find that there are so many interesting things that you do outside of your job that then it somehow informs your experimenting mindset when you allow it to. So if anybody has any questions on consultancy, please hit up me and Sam. I mean, we have
Yeah.
tons of experience that we can share. And they're not all success stories. So by all
Yeah.
means,
You heard me.
yeah, there's a lot of lessons learned to to
Yes.
to help also steer away from some things that wish someone told us. And I think that's the big takeaway is it is uncomfortable, and acknowledging it's uncomfortable, it's scary, and it may not work the way you anticipate or at all. But I strongly encourage everybody to embrace the mindset of experimentation as a general note for 2025.
Couldn't agree more. Here's to experimenting more in 2025. If
Here,
we could
here.
post at this time of day, we would.
Yes, I've got coffee. I don't know if that counts.
Water
I'm
and
spiked.
spray. Wow.
Too early, guys. We got something to do.
Exactly. Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to this month's Musings with May here on Ambush on Air. And May, thank you as always for coming and chatting with me.
My
Can't
pleasure.
wait for the next one. I'm sure we'll have a laundry list of fun this year. So
That's
thanks.
right. You got it. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Party on.